Here's one more rock term worth defining. New wave. This is the phrase that people use to describe some of the music that came after punk in the 1970s. What most people don't know is that this was a made-up marketing term. By late 1979, the original punk rock scene and the original sound of punk was starting to burn out. I mean, you can't burn that hot and be against everything without eventually just exhausting yourself. But there was another side to this scene. Punk gave people the idea and the courage to try new ideas when it came to rock and roll. The music that resulted was certainly different. Listening to it, you could tell that punk had happened, but this music wasn't entirely like punk. Yes, it was new and it was fresh and sometimes angry and sometimes intense, but somehow slightly removed from punk. The arrangements were different. The instrumentation had changed. The fashion sense was definitely not punk, and the politics were all wrong. In fact, sometimes there were no politics. Humans, being humans, tried to find to categorize this new sound to make sense of it all. Somebody had to give it a name, and there were lots of attempts. Someone called it new music, with music spelled M-U-S-I-C-K. That was suggested by writer John Savage in 1978. Another British writer named Simon Frith was partial to afterpunk, spelled as one word, but that flopped when he suggested it in the spring of 1979. Post-punk was another possibility, and that seems to be the invention of Charles Shaar Murray, a writer for England's NME magazine. It had some success. In fact, we use post-punk to describe a certain brand of, band that came after punk. One of the best definitions I've ever read for post-punk was, if punk was all about F you, post-punk's main theme was, I'm effed. Tony Wilson, the head of Factory Records and the person who signed Joy Division, preferred postmodern. Not bad, but perhaps a little too academic sounding, too snobbish, too elitist, too vague. And this leads us to the term new wave. This is the English translation of nouvelle vague, a term applied to a creative explosion in French film in the 1960s. The first person to try and use this phrase with the music that came after punk apparently was Sex Pistols manager Malcolm McLaren. Seymour Stein, the head of Sire Records and the person responsible for signing the Ramones and the Talking Heads, may have heard it from Malcolm. And Seymour, you see, had a problem. In order to sell some records, he needed radio airplay. But most radio stations were either afraid to play this new music or completely dismissive of it. Punk was too weird, too violent, too political. And besides, it was just a fad. It was going to go away anyway. To get around the negative connotations of the word punk, Seymour started using the phrase new wave to disguise the music that he was trying to sell. As a way to soften the impact. Seymour had a distribution deal with Warner Brothers Records. They liked his idea. Soon, Polygram Records and other majors followed suit. And by 1980, new wave became this catch-all term for experimental, artsy, pop and punk influenced music with commercial potential. And this is how bands like The Police and Blondie and Devo and Elvis Costello and others were marketed. And so were the Talking Heads.